really need to know is infinite love is the only truth. Everything else is illusion. And then it went through explaining the illusory nature of reality, how there was no physical. I mean, there was one line, I had instant recall of it afterwards, wrote it all down. One question that this voice said was, why do you fly in an aeroplane from A to B when you are A and you are B and everything in between? And it went on like this for hours. And what I did, I came back and I started looking at science and quantum physics, and I realized that if you put the dots together, they've already realized it's an illusion. And because it's energy, information, consciousness, and not solid, physical, this reality, it means that things like shape-shifting become explainable. Because when I talk about these hybrid bloodlines, they're actually hybrid information fields. And when I'm looking at you now, I am decoding your waveform field, and you, as I'm seeing, in the form that I'm seeing, exist here, right? Now, if you were a hybrid, one of these bloodlines, you could shift that other part of the hybrid field so that becomes the dominant one. Now, as the observer, I'm decoding that one. So here, you would be something that's not human. To my experience, you have physically, solidity, move from one body to another. But no, the only place the shift goes on physically, illusory physically, is in the decoding processes of the observer. And you know, one of the things that they've talked about for years, some scientists have, but now is becoming more and more accepted, is that this world, as we perceive it, only exists when we look at it, when it's observed. Because what they've found is, interestingly, that when something is observed, then you have the waveform collapse into a particle form. Now, I would go one step further and say it's not, this world doesn't exist as we see it when it's observed, but when it's decoded. And the act of observation, the act of focus triggers that decoding, that world. So this world as we perceive it literally only exists in the form that we perceive it when we decode it. And so you get, it's one of the things I talk about in the book. There was a book came out in the 1990s called The Holographic Universe, written by a guy called Michael Tolbert. Very interesting book. What he'd done, he went to mainstream scientists who were convinced that this world was holographic. And we hear a lot about this now. I was writing about it a long time ago, a lot about this, oh, the world's holographic. But, so we live in a holographic universe. No, we don't. We live in a waveform information universe. The hologram is what we decode the world into from that, like a computer decodes Wi-Fi onto what we see to what we see on the screen. Anyway, what one story in this book that Michael Tolbert tells was when his father had a stage hypnotist along for a party at his house. And he describes how this hypnotist had this man sitting in a chair like you, and I think his name was Tom, and he put him through the party tricks by manipulating what? Manipulating his perceptions. And therefore his reality changed. But anyway, at one point he said to this guy, Tom, he says, when I bring you back to a waking state, you're not going to be able to see your daughter in the room. So then he leads the daughter to stand right in front of her father. So he's looking into her belly, right? So he then brings him back apparently to a waking state. And he says, can you see your daughter in the room, Tom? Tom's looking around. He says, no. She's here. Can't see her. the hypnotist goes behind the back of the daughter, puts his hand in the small of her back and said, I'm holding something, Tom. What am I holding? And Tom's going, well, you're holding a watch. Obvious to him. His daughter's between him and the watch. He said, there's an inscription on the watch, Tom. Can you read it? He peered forward. He read the inscription. His daughter's between him and the watch. You say that to a mainstream scientist. Load of rubbish. You know, a Richard Dawkins or whatever. Load of rubbish, load of rubbish. But it's so easy to explain. Everything in its base form is waveform. And we decode that into this reality. So his daughter is in waveform, not in his five-sense reality, in waveform. If he doesn't decode that waveform field into a holographic expression of it, reflection of it, then he won't be able to see her because she's not operating in his five-sense reality. What the hypnotist has done with the hypnotic suggestion is he has, in effect, firewalled Tom's brain from decoding that field. Everyone else in the room is laughing, shaking their heads, because they've not been through that cut off, that blocking of her field being decoded. So to them, she's standing there in front of him in solid form, holographic form here. But he hasn't decoded that into holographic form. So in his five-sense holographic reality, she doesn't exist. And if she doesn't exist, he can see what's behind her. And this is, you see, when you get to looking at the world like this, and then you think that all the institutions that run the world and dictate human perception, education, academia, politics, journalism, on and on it goes. Medicine, science, apart from the cutting edge of it, they're all making decisions and they're all communicating how things are, postage stamp consensus, from the perspective of a reality that does not exist. This is why mainstream scientists like Professor Richard Dawkins, the kind of anti-alternative anything professor at Oxford University, that's why he waves away any alternative explanation of reality. That's impossible. Yes, Richard, mate, it's impossible if the world is solid. It ain't. It ain't. But because he's bought the illusion, and most of science has bought the illusion, then things become impossible. I remember the British government medical advisor, I think her name was Dame Sally Davis or something like that. I think she still is. She came out and said homeopathy was a nonsense, fakery basically, because she has no idea about reality. Like I say, the base form of everything in this reality is waveform information. And what they say about homeopathy is it's impossible to work because the potions are diluted and diluted and diluted until there's none of the original substance left. And because five senses say, can I see it, hear it, touch it, taste it, exactly, it exists or it doesn't exist, the substance is everything. The substance you can see, physical. There's an organization in Germany called the Aerospace Institute in Stuttgart, Germany, which has developed a way of photographing information in water. Fascinating. You can see videos of it on the internet. And what they did was they got this big tank of water and they put a flower in it and then took the flower out and then photographed the droplets of water. And they found information from the flower in every droplet. And one of the things about holographic reality is every part of a hologram is a smaller version of the whole, so it's going to be in every droplet. And then they got people from the local community to come up, and they got another tank of water, and they got little dishes with their names on. And they got each of the people to take 4 droplets from the tank and put it in a dish with their name on. And then they photographed the droplets. What they found was that each 4 droplets were different from the other 4 droplets of everyone else, but the 4 droplets from each person were virtually identical. In other words, just taking a droplet of water and putting it in the dish had impregnated that person's energetic influence upon the water in terms of frequency, vibration, information. So what homeopathy is, when they dilute the substance until there's none of the substance left, what is left in the water is the waveform information of the substance, just like the waveform information of the flower was in the water droplets in the tank after the flower had been taken out. And it's the waveform of that substance which interacts with the waveform field of the body, and if it's done properly, can balance it out and bring about what we call harmony, the opposite of dis-ease, the opposite of illness. But because you see this chief medical officer who is making decisions about what people should have and vaccines and all this stuff, is absolutely clueless about the nature of reality itself, and thus waves away homeopathy on the basis of she doesn't understand how it operates, and therefore how it can work. And you find this with mainstream science everywhere. If they can't explain it, it can't be happening.
Right.
But when you look at complementary ways of treating the body, they're invariably waveform level treaters. Because if the waveform information field is in a balanced, harmonious state, then that which is decoded from it, which is just a reflection of that, the holographic reality we decode this waveform world into, must also be in a balanced, healthy state, because that's no more than that. That's a movie screen of that projector. And so people say about modern medicine and mainstream medicine, they never treat the cause, they always treat the symptom. But how can they treat the cause when the cause is in the waveform level of the body and they don't even accept that exists? All they're left with is treating the symptom, which is the projection of an imbalance in the waveform level in the holographic decoded version of reality. And so what humanity has been manipulated to do is look at the world, see how it would like to change it, but running around just the same as standing on the stage in a movie theater and screaming at the screen, demanding that it changes. This is waving your banner in a protest. Screaming at the screen, demanding the movie changes. Never going to change. It's hit the screen, it's a done deal. You want to change the movie, you've got to change where the movie's coming from. Then you can change the movie. So what people have been manipulated into is even trying to change what they would like to change, but doing it in a way that it's impossible. You can't change a movie when it hits the screen. And therefore it's what manifests the movie that we need to change. And that comes down in the human experience to perception, which becomes the feedback loop, which becomes the movie screen.
Right. And I know you want to spend the next few years really going into that
right,
perception
big time,
level.
Yeah.
And I want to hear about that. I just want to get your thoughts on Trump, the Trump phenomenon, and what you can tell about the rest of the world by looking at their reaction to Trump.
Well, Trump is the equivalent of a Hollywood actor on the movie screen. And the anti-Trumps people are other actors in the movie. And so those people who get caught in it Oh, yeah, he's the baddie. He is. He's the baddie in this movie. That Trump, he's the baddie. Oh no, he's the goodie. He is the person I like. Right? It's a movie, and while we are focusing on this again, this minutiae of Trump, anti-Trump, left, right, and all this nonsense that we get caught into, Silicon Valley's doing what it is doing in terms of destroying freedom of information and driving on behalf of things like DARPA, the technological development arm of the Pentagon, this AI transhumanist agenda. It's a diversion. And you know, just a quick one, I talk about this hidden hand. These here today, gone tomorrow politicians are just that. Here today, gone tomorrow. What we need to look at is that which is always there, because that's where the power is. That's what pushes this agenda on, no matter who's in power, who's the president, what party, whatever. A quick example. In September 2000, an organization in America called the Project for the New American Century published a document calling for the American government to, quote, fight and decisively win multiple theater wars, to bring about a series of regime changes. And it named the countries that they wanted to regime change: Iraq, Libya, Syria, Lebanon, Iran, North Korea, China. The people who published that document included Donald Rumsfeld, who a few months later would be Secretary of State for Defense in the Bush administration, Paul Wolfowitz, who would be his deputy at the Pentagon, Dick Cheney, who would be de facto president under Bush for 2 terms, Dov Zakheim, who would control the entirety of the Pentagon budget in that same period. In that document in September 2000, they said that this process of transformation, all these regime changes, would necessarily be slow, this is the quote, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. 1 year to the month after that document was published, 9 months after the people that wrote it came to power in the Bush administration, the United States had, in September 2001, what Bush called at the time the Pearl Harbor of the 21st century. As a result of that, this process of regime change was triggered by the so-called war on terror justified by 9/11, which the official story of 9/11 is tragically laughable when you break it down and you see how the contradictions. Anyway, this is where I'm going in terms of the politicians and Trump. First man in, of course, officially, George W. Bush. They went into Afghanistan. Then, with Tony Blair lying about weapons of mass destruction, they went into Iraq. And the reason they lied about weapons of mass destruction is because Iraq was on this list of regime change. They didn't have an excuse, so they made one up. And by the way, let us not forget, people now, including even the mainstream media, accept that they were lied to over weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which led to a catastrophic invasion and the catastrophe that has followed. Let us not forget that the very same people, not the same agencies, the same governments, the same personalities that told us there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq when they knew they weren't, were the same people that gave us the official story of 9/11. Okay, so the list, Iraq. Then they go into Libya, also on the list. But now Bush is gone, Blair's gone. Now it's Barack Obama. He's a Democrat, not a Republican. And it's David Cameron. He's a conservative, not the illusory of Labour, Blair. But now they're going into another one on the list, and then into Syria. again, creating mayhem and catastrophe. I mean, Libya is one of the great world's basket cases now, when it was the highest per capita income country in Africa before they sent the boys in. And so that was Obama and that was Cameron. Then we come to Trump. And Trump is now, yes, he's supposed to be a Republican, but he's the anti-establishment man. He's a maverick. A maverick who was going to drain the swamp and handed the American economy to Goldman Sachs from day one or before day one. But who is he demonizing now? He's demonizing Iran, and he's demonizing North Korea, other people on the list, other countries on the list. So this list from September 2000 has been ticked off all the way through these different politicians and different parties and different personalities. So no matter who's coming and going or who you're going to vote for, it's like some Americans say, it don't matter who you vote for, the government still gets in. Yes, the secret government. Because America's a wonderful example of how it works. So it works the same everywhere. During the Bush administration, and a Republican administration like now, you have this group that control the Republican Party that are acknowledged by the mainstream media. They're called neoconservatives or neocons. They were the people that created the Project for the New American Century, that wrote that document in September 2000. And then in the Democratic Party, you have another group very much the same that I call the democons. This is your George Soros's and Zbigniew Brzezinski before he died this year, and others. The key is that if you go one step back in the shadows, the neocons and the democons answer to the same master. So it means that whether it's one or the other, Republican or Democrat, that is always in power. And that's what's been driving this agenda of ticking these countries off as these people come in. Now, I'll give you another example of how the manipulation works. For me, Trump was selected by these people. He was selected by these people for a number of reasons. One was because he would hand the government over to the corporation billionaires, which he's done, more billionaires in this administration than any other American administration. But also, he was, by his very nature, a polarity that you could play another polarity against, because they want divide and rule. They want civil war in America. They want civil war in Europe as well. But because while we're fighting each other, that can do what the hell it likes, unchallenged. But was one thing about Trump, which I think he was genuine on during the election campaign. He really didn't want conflict with Russia. He did want to come together. I think he was genuine on that. So if you look from the moment he got elected, although there were so many things of benefit to this hidden hand for Trump, there was one thing they didn't want, and that was Russia coming together. They want to hold them apart. They want to keep them in conflict. And so the moment he became elected, we had this Russia hacked the election. Russia this, Russia that, Russia the other. I burnt the toast. It's the Russians. And what it has done is prevent him from getting closer to Russia. Because if he tried to, they'd say, hey, controlled by the Russians, so he's got to stay away from it. And therefore, they're holding the two apart.
Is that what the election scandal's about? To make sure he doesn't get closer to the Russians? Yeah,
this is what it's all about.
So more hate, more anxiety, just keep that division going on.
Yeah, what we're talking about, Brian, as we've talked today, is going from a perception of little me, which is what? A perception of apartness, a perception of everything being apart from everything else, to an understanding that we're all actually an expression of the same consciousness. And therefore you see it in politics and in world events, this desire to constantly drive apart. And this is what, in part, political correctness is about. It's about dividing different self-identities from each other and setting them at war with each other. And you know, this thing with Harvey Weinstein and all the stuff going on with allegations of abusing women in Washington and in Westminster. I said earlier that when they want an excuse to stop or to censor, they'll find an excuse that seems quite extreme, and people say, "Well, yeah, I can understand why they're doing that." But once they've got in, they'll then widen the interpretation until it encompasses people that are nothing to do with this. And so, of course, you have horrific and genuine abuse of women. Of course you do. You find it everywhere. Abuse of men as well. And that needs to be addressed. Of course it does. But if you notice, we've gone from sexual abuse and rape, horrific, but also now pulled into the same perception of abuse, are things that years ago would have been a bit of office banter, would have been a bit of a laugh, you know, having fun, making fun of each other. That's now there. And the effect of this has so frozen people, men particularly, that it was summed up by one British politician who said, "I will never hug another woman again who's not my wife. I will shake their hand." And what is this doing? It's driving men and women apart. But you see, this is the classic way they do it. They'll take something that has to be addressed, that is absolutely wrong and can't be allowed to continue. But then they pull everything else into it, into the same conversation. And now, you know, people are, I mean, look at it. Look at the mental gymnastics that people go through before they speak now. They're speaking with a woman. Oh, okay, I'm not going to be spontaneous and just be me and let the energy flow. No, no. How can I put this? No, what mustn't I say? Oh, transgender. Do you know, there was an interview on my website today, which has a guy from Britain who was taken to court for saying to someone who looked like a man and was officially, legally a man, saying to him as he passed, because he'd seen him one or two times, "All right, geezer," as they say in London, "All right, mate, all right, geezer." He went to court and was convicted. He won on appeal, but he was convicted for basically hate speech, for not addressing this man who looked like a man and was legally a man, because this man had decided he was a woman. So suddenly, "All right, geezer," is hate speech. What is this doing? "All right, geezer," which is it's something you say. You know, it's a friendly gesture. "All right, geezer, how you doing?" Don't say that anymore. It's destroying human discourse. And it's all part of this agenda of destroying the free flow of information, because people will not more and more give their opinion on something because they fear the reaction of others and being called a racist or a bigot and all the rest of it. And of course, social media, run by these corporations like Facebook, it's basically an inquisition. It's the digital inquisition, whereby you say the slightest thing out of politically correctness, which changes by the hour, it seems to me, more things added on, and you get this Twitter storm. And people, and you have celebrities putting the sackcloth on and getting on their knees and asking to be forgiven for saying something completely innocuous. And so what I've done in the book, Everything You Need to Know But Never Been Told, is I've just gone for these things head on, not in an abusive way, but actually saying, I'll decide what I say and what I think. No, and you won't. I respect your right to have your opinion. Why don't you respect other people's right to have their opinion? And this is what's destroying discourse. And as I mentioned to you before we started the chat, what I find incredibly sad and not a little pathetic is it's those that call themselves liberal, using the word these days come out of America, called progressives, who are driving this tyranny. Because the last thing they are is liberal. It's the inversion again. Everything's inverted. If you look at the dictionary definition of liberal, which is someone who believes in maximum freedom of expression, maximum freedom of thought, maximum freedom of lifestyle, then basically you're describing me. That's what I've been like all my life. I have a simple philosophy. Do what you like so long as you don't impose it on anyone else. What you do, as long as you don't impose it on anyone else, it's none of my business. As long as everyone's happy with it, all the best. Just don't impose it on anyone else. But that which calls itself progressive and talks about promoting diversity is an inversion of liberal. It's an inversion of diversity. It talks about race, people being racist when it is obsessed with race. It's obsessed with race, it's obsessed with gender and the minutiae of it, like I said. So, hold on a minute. We're all one consciousness. What are you getting obsessed with race for? And gender and all this stuff, just an experience. But those that are obsessed with race, obsessed with gender, obsessed with destroying diversity by destroying other people's opinions that they don't agree with, promotes itself as liberal. It's a joke and it's an inversion, and it needs to be called out because it's very, very dangerous. When any tyranny seeks to get power, it targets information. It targets opinion that's different to the tyranny, and it targets opinion exposing the tyranny. This is why the Nazis burnt the books. This is why the Nazis broke up public meetings of those that were exposing the Nazis. What do we have today? We have people calling themselves anti-Nazi who seek to suppress other people's opinions, other sources of information, and ban public events of those that are exposing the fascism that's taking over this world, but a fascism, ironically, that calls itself anti-fascist. We're seeing a mirror of what happened in Nazi Germany, but it calls itself anti-Nazi. It's, like I said, it's a mind game. It's a perception game. And this is the point, really. The colleges and the universities in the West, particularly in America and Canada and Britain and some other countries, has been virtually now completely taken over by this progressive, anti-fascist, fascist mindset.
It's so anti-fascist that it's fascist.
Yeah, because see, labels are irrelevant. Outcomes change the world, not labels. Outcomes change the world. So what's the outcome of this progressive political correctness agenda? Destruction of freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of free flow of information. That's the outcome. And that's a fascist outcome. That's a tyrannical outcome. I don't care what you call yourselves. I don't care what labels you give yourselves. I don't care how many times you call yourself liberal. What's the outcome? And the outcome is the same as what happened in Nazi Germany, basically, in all the major forms. And it needs to be called out because this mindset is leaving the colleges and is starting to people the institutions. The institutions that ultimately decide whether laws are going to be passed to ban this being said or that being said and the other being said. This is how now we reach a point where someone's saying, all right, geezer, ends up in court. This is what we're facing. And while people are going, oh, I'm for that Trump, oh, I'm against that Trump, while they're watching that movie, all this is happening. And what I'm saying is, over here, This is what's really happening.
Right.
And then people make up their minds what they believe.
David, tell me, what's it like to be David Icke? Is it fun?
Always fun.
It is.
It's fun.
Why?
It's fun. It's fun. It's fun because you are challenging norms. You're not doing what the system tells you should do. You're doing what you believe to be right. You're not asking anyone else to believe it necessarily. Just look at the information and the evidence and then make your mind up. That's all it is. Last thing we need is someone else cross-legged on a mountain saying, you know, I'm the Buddha, I'm telling you everything you need to know, and nothing else. It's like in the book, Everything You Need to Know But Never Been Told, I explain before the book starts what I mean by that title. It's not everything you need to know in every detail. It's just that which will allow you to see that there's another way of looking at the world. What I'm not saying is, and you must believe it. That's for people to decide for themselves. That's the lost art of someone saying, I'm going to look at the information, that information, and then I'm going to decide what I think. I'm not going to be externally told what to think. I'm going to decide my unique view of how things are. That creates this great world of true diversity rather than the illusion of diversity, which says everyone must think the same or you're a bigot, a Nazi, and whatever name they come up with next.
So it's fun to be you.
It's fun. It's fun being different in a world of uniformity. It's fun refusing to bow to the tyranny of other people trying to impose their will and their perceptions on me. And it's really fun because I'm seeing more and more people going, hold on a minute, I'm going to have another look at this thing called life, and I'm going to have another look at this thing I thought was me. And seeing people realize that there's more than one way of looking at everything. As someone brilliantly said, if there was only one way of looking at things, there'd only need to be one person. But there's billions of us, so we should have billions of ways of looking at things. Political correctness is trying to destroy that, and I'm not having it. I'm not having it. I'm not having it. And you can have all the Twitter storms you like, people. I'm not having it.
You spent the last 3 years touring the world, doing these 10-hour shows. David, where do you get the energy from? You're no spring chicken. How can you do that?
Well, you know, when you come from the perception of who we really are, as opposed to who we're told we are, what is energy? What is lack of energy? It's a perception. You know, you can put someone into a hypnotic trance and tell them they're dog-tired. They'll fall asleep. It's just a perception. So where I'm coming from is I'm a unique point of attention with an infinite awareness. Just infinite awareness. Have a problem finding energy? No. Energy is infinite. It's an infinite abundance, and you can draw it in because we're infinite. If you buy this, you know, born age 70, then basically the program is dictating your life, because the body has a program. It has a cycle that I say has been put there on purpose, and it's a cycle we can break. It's a cycle. You look at anything in this world, it's born, it ages, and it dies. It's a software program. It's a repeating cycle, more pseudo-randomness. But you can break that because it's an illusion. It's just a perceptual program. And if you can override it by changing self-identity. So I'm not saying I don't get tired from time to time. I do. But whenever I need energy, it's there. When I came here today, I've been doing a lot of stuff in the last few days, and I had a train journey and all that stuff. And you know, I got here and I thought, oh, I'm a bit tired. As soon as you start, boom. Where's the tiredness? It's not there anymore, because it's an illusion. It's all illusion. It's all a manifestation of our perception of reality. And I get quite emotional about this sometimes. I look at the world, I look at the suffering, I look at the people with illnesses they don't need to have, and people with emotional situations they don't need to have. I see people fighting over race and fighting over gender and fighting over culture and country. And we're all one. It's so sad. But this is what drives me on. Because in the end, it's information that will change this, because it's suppression of information that's caused it.
I saw an interview that said that your life was your work, but I'm wondering, what does David do for fun?
I work. See, for me, I tell you what, by the way, I decided a long time ago now that basically, people, they look at a lifespan and they say you need this, you need that, you need this and that, you need the other. But they'll go to work and then they'll go home, and that's the leisure time. That's the me time, the play time. The way where it's come from, well, who knows? But the way I perceive my life is I'm at work. I'm at work, and I'm gonna go home from work when I leave this body, and I go out into the great forever. My point of attention is released by this focus of attention we call the body, and then the world changes completely as this focus of attention, I withdraw from this focus of attention. This is what near-death experiences are experiencing when they say when they leave the body briefly, when the body dies, they say they could understand past, present, and future all in the same moment, multiple realities at the same time. The reason they can is because they've been released from this focus of attention, the body, which focuses our attention on visible light and the electromagnetic field. So I'm at work, and I'll go home, because what I look at is, like everyone else, every other expression of everything, every tree, every breath of air, every drop of water, every blade of grass, we are all expressions of infinite, eternal consciousness experiencing itself. And thus, I don't mind that I don't go away on holidays and all this stuff, and I don't do this, and I have fun with my family, mind, but I don't have all these other things, all this social stuff and that people think you must have, because I see my life as eternity. That which I'm experiencing here, I've come to work, and I don't want to go until I've made a much bigger contribution than I have, and I'm having fun. I'm having fun with it, because I could be on the postage stamp believing in it.
Do you ever worry they're going to take you out?
They can't. Feedback loop. If I don't let them in the feedback loop, they cannot take me out physically, because there is no physical.
So even if they tried to take out the physical, they couldn't.
Couldn't do it.
Couldn't do it.
Can't do it. If I perceive that they can. This is an interesting thing, Brian. When I first went to America, I was talking to a man and a dog, mate. I was talking in people's front rooms. 4 or 5 people in somebody's front room, and it was just, oh dear. It's like being one of those pool players going from pool hall to pool hall trying to earn a living. Not that I did earn a living, I came back much poorer than when I went. No one turned up.
What kept you through those times? Because those were hard times. And after the Wogan, those were hard times too.
Yeah, but, I have this phrase, life often gives you your greatest gifts brilliantly disguised as your worst nightmare. There were great times when I look back. All that ridicule was fantastic for me.
Because?
Because it set me free of the prison that most people live in, the fear of what other people think. That's the prison they live in. Most people are not living their lives. Political correctness and all this Twitter storm nonsense, childish nonsense, is ever more fiercely imposing that fear of what other people think. And once you fall for that, you're not living your life anymore. You're no longer your unique point of attention. You're what someone else's point of attention decides you should be. And see, that period of historic levels of ridicule that I went through in the 1992, 3, 4, etc., and still now with the mainstream media, it cleared me out of that fear of what other people thought. And further along the road, I didn't know it was coming. When you get into some of the far out stuff that I get into, like reptilians and shapeshifting and all this stuff, someone who is in fear of what other people think is never going to come out with that stuff. Never. But it's the greatest freedom. I can recommend it because the mental gymnastics disappears. You're no longer saying, well, how do I put this and what do I leave out so this person will not think I'm crazy? I don't care. People think I'm crazy. I think the world is mad, so we all have a different opinion. And you say what you think, you say what you believe. You're not saying to people, and you must believe it too. No. But you say what you believe. What you see is what you get, because there's no fear of how people receive you. I don't want to leave this world, and have someone put a statue up to me. I don't want a round of applause. I want to know what's going on. That's what I want to do. I want to know what's going on. I want to communicate it, and then people can make of it what they will. That's the drive that I have to uncover things. So I look at my life as a job, and I love it, and I wouldn't want to do anything else. In fact, if I had to do anything else, I'd probably be out of here, because I want to do what I'm doing. I love it.
I hear you're a bit of an introvert, which is hard for people to believe, because you go in front of these huge audiences and you interact with people.
Yeah, I'm a private person in the sense that I like my solitude. Because people say, do you meditate? No, I don't. What I do is daydream. I've been daydreaming all my life.
Since you were a kid.
The times the teachers at school said, Ike, stop daydreaming. I just think, well, I like daydreaming. It's more interesting what you're telling me. I like daydreaming. Just let your mind go. I love that. I do like my solitude. I mean, I probably spend 90%, maybe 80-90% of my time alone. I live on the Isle of Wight in a little flat with one bedroom and one little office where I write all my books. And people say, well, I thought you'd live in a mansion and all that stuff. Well, A, I couldn't afford a mansion, and B, I wouldn't thank you for it if you gave it to me. I don't even have a garden. Why? Because if I have a garden, I've got to organize it being looked after. If I have a bigger house than my little flat, I've got to organize it being looked after. I want the simplest life possible, so my total focus is on what I do. And that's why most of my life, 90% of my life is what I do. And of course my family, like Jamie, the boys, Gareth, they work with me. And so, it's, I'm not a loner and a recluse, but I do like my space, because it's in the space when I'm daydreaming that so much comes to me, which takes me in different directions, which eventually lead to no understanding.
Have you changed your mind about things? Have you ever gone down one path and realized I was wrong about that, and kind of come back and said, I'm going to go the other way?
Not really. What's changed is the depth of understanding. You can think, and another important thing is the more you understand, which is why in that book, it's a very focused book in the way it's written. It's because you start to see the difference between what's interesting and what's really relevant. Lots of things that are interesting, but what is really relevant to people now? And so that's changed. Some of the things, some of the ancient stuff which I talked about is very important, great in my understanding, and very relevant to it. But it's like, okay, well let's look at what's really relevant to people now. So that's kind of changed in that way. But it's more understanding the depth and the detail. So you saw it in a certain way, then you get more depth and detail, and actually think, actually, there's more to that than I thought. So little things like that, but not in theme, not in theme. Okay. It's been a process of the information layering. You see, when this started for me, I was a television presenter with the BBC and a national spokesman of the British Green Party, and I was minding my own business, you know. And then from about early 1989, whenever I was in a room alone, I didn't feel like I was alone. It was like there was something there. And this went on throughout 1989 while I'm working for the BBC and the Green Party. In fact, the Green Party had a very successful year that year, most successful ever, I think, the European elections. But so it got more and more tangible until in early-ish, about March